equity over there. Okay. Government, why do government raise taxes, tax revenues, or borrow money, and so on? Because they want to provide schools, they want to protect us, defense, and so on, carry out their projects, grow the economy, alleviate poverty, and so on. Okay. In this next session, we are going to talk about the idea of tax incidence, and I'm not going to go too much into details. There's something I want to highlight, and I will stress on that. Take, for example, this is the market for pizza. A box of pizza is 10 cedis, and the market clears. There are 500 boxes that are demanded and also sold. Now, imagine the government decides to levy a tax on buyers. Now, look, whenever the tax is 1.5 CD, whenever you buy a box of pizza, put 1.5 CD on the table of the pizza seller. It will go to government. That's the tax. So here in this setting, we assume a tax of 1.50 CD is imposed on buyers. So whenever you buy the pizza, they said after you bought, put 1.5 CD on the counter. It will go to the government. Now, I want to show you that that's the purpose of this next set of slides, that whether the tax is on buyers or government has announced that the tax is on sellers, that whenever they sell a box of pizza, the seller should rather give government 1.5. The incidence is the same. That's the where I'm going to. So this one is on buyers. We will show that even if government has announced that the tax is on sellers, the outcome is the same. Okay. So when the tax is imposed, remember, this is our previous, let me go to full. Remember over here, the tax is on, this is the equilibrium, remember, 10 and 500. Okay. So the tax is on buyers. What happens? It will shift the demand curve down. Remember, taxes are reducing the purchasing power of people. So it reduces, it shifts the demand curve downwards, decrease in demand by the size of the tax. Okay. And then we look for our new intersection here. Okay. That's a new intersection. So the market now clears at 450 boxes of pizza sold. Now, when we go back to the initial here, when you buy the pizza for 10 CD, you, the buyer, you are paying 10 CD. The seller is also going home with 10 CD. But when the tax is levied, it doesn't work like that anymore. The buyer will pay more. The seller too doesn't go home with the entire money paid by the buyer, because some will go to government. Here, you pay 10 CD, 10 CD goes to the seller straight. Here, once the tax is imposed, it shifts the demand curve. And I'll give you a flavor, a reason why the demand curve shifts downwards by the size of the tax. Okay, I'll get to that later. Let me make my main point first. So here, the new equilibrium is 450. PS means the price the seller receives. And these are numbers picked for teaching. The idea is that, look, in the past, the seller went home with 10 CD. Now he's going home with 9.5. Okay. And the buyer used to pay 10 CD. Now he's paying 11 CD. So the tax was 1 CD 50 pesos. It has been shared. The 1 CD 50 pesos has been shared, that the buyer has taken 1 CD out of it, and the seller is taking 50 pesos. That's why he's going home with 9.5 instead of 10. And the buyer is paying 11 instead of 10. They share it, I've said, right? How did they share? Because of elasticity. Maybe the seller cannot push the entire tax on buyers because they might stop buying pizza. So he kind of takes 50 pesos of it and pushes just 1 CD to the buyer. Okay. So that's the main idea, that the tax has caused a wedge between how much the buyer pays and how much the seller receives. I paid 11 CD, but you went home with only 9.5 as a seller because of the tax. In the absence of the tax, I paid 10 CD, the seller went home with 10 CD. So that's the main story here. the tax creates a wedge between how much the buyer pays and how much the seller receives. Okay. So this is how they share the tax. Okay. Buyer pays 1 cedi more, seller gets 50 pesos less. Okay. So the 1.5 cedi, 50 pesos is paid by seller, 1 cedi borne by the buyer. Okay, now look at the second leg. What if the tax was announced to be on sellers rather than buyers? We show that the outcome is the same. Now, before then, let me show why when the tax was on the buyers, why the demand curve shifted down the size of the tax. The idea is simple. If you take a demand schedule, price and quantity, let's say at the price of 10 cedi, you bought 500 pieces of pizza. When there is a tax of 1.5 on the buyer still wants 500 boxes of pizza, but he wants to pay at 8.5 because he still wants to spend 10 cedis total. I want to pay 8.5. When I add the tax, then I'm back to my 10 cedi. That's the idea. There is a tax, but he still wants his final expenditure to be 10 cedis. So he really wants to pay 8.5 for the same amount. If you follow that through for the entire demand schedule, it ends up shifting the demand curve downwards by the size of the tax because the schedule will be adjusted. Okay. So if he used to pay 9 cedi for 600 boxes, he actually wants to pay 9 minus 1.5 is what? 7.5 for the same amount. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, so it leads the demand curve. So over here, you will see the supply curve will also shift. Okay, this is a tax on sellers. So supply curve also shifts. The same idea by the size of the tax. Okay, the tax is on sellers, is making production expensive. So there's a decrease in supply by the size of the tax. Okay, what is the story here? Same thing. Whether the tax is on buyers or sellers, outcome is the same. The buyer is paying 11 cedi, seller is receiving 9.5. Okay, that's how it works. So that is the story here. Okay, here, this is the summary of what I want to show. The effect on price and quantity and the tax incidence are the same, whether a tax is imposed on buyers or sellers. So it doesn't matter whether government announces that, hey, I'm putting a tax of 5 cedi on a product and I'm charging it to buyers, or I'm charging it to sellers. It doesn't matter. The outcome will be the same. They share it based on elasticity. That's tax incidence. Okay. So look at this, an example. Look, supply is more elastic than demand. We are going to draw a graph. The supply curve is more elastic than demand. So expect the supply curve to be flatter than the demand curve. This is the demand is steep, supply is a bit flatter. Who will pay more of the tax? Who will pay? If sellers are facing, supply curve is more elastic. Okay, supplies can turn around quickly. They can leave the market quickly than demand. Demand is relatively inelastic. Who pays more of the tax? This is the price if there is no tax. Once there is a tax, it creates a wedge. Go to the supply curve, you read, okay, this vertical line is just the magnitude of the tax. So you read on the supply curve how much sellers receive, go to demand curve and read how much buyers will pay. Okay. So look at this big gap is the buyer's share of the burden, and this small one is the seller's share of the burden. Why is it so? It is easier for sellers than buyers to leave the market. Yes, the one who is more elastic is flexible. He can flex. Okay, he can flex around, so he won't pay more of the tax, which is the sellers. Okay, they have an elastic supply curve, and the buyer, you have an inelastic demand curve. So because of that, buyers bear most of the tax burden. Case 2, what if demand is more elastic? It is the buyer who is more flexible, can leave the market, can flex around. Then he will pay less tax. So when the curves show up here, you will see that the demand is flatter than the supply. Demand is flatter, supply is a bit steep. When you follow the sketch in the drawing, you will see that now the buyer is paying less. Okay. This space here is smaller, this rectangle, than this, okay, paid by the seller.